Did you know that over 158 million people worldwide have experienced a relationship with a narcissist, and most of them never realize it until it's too late? But here's what they don't tell you. There's one moment that flips the entire dynamic. When the narcissist realizes you were a real one. It doesn't happen right after the breakup. It hits them when they can no longer replace what you gave, your empathy, your presence, your calm. That's when the silence becomes their loudest punishment. Studies show that narcissists experience up to a 40% drop in self-esteem once they lose a stable, emotionally intelligent partner. They don't regret losing love. They regret losing control. And yet, that's the moment you finally begin to heal, when their illusion fades and your reality begins. So before we dive deep into what truly happens when the narcissist realizes you were a real one, do me a favor, like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. It might be exactly what helps them break free. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This quote captures the exact moment a narcissist realizes they've lost someone genuine, the moment the illusion shatters and reality hits them in the face. For months, maybe years, they lived in a fantasy where they believed they were in control, where they thought your empathy was weakness and your loyalty was guaranteed. But one day, that illusion collapses, and what follows is not regret, not yet, but confusion, emptiness, and panic. Psychologists have studied this phenomenon for decades. According to the American Psychological Association, narcissistic personality traits often hide deep feelings of insecurity and fear of abandonment. Freud called it the mask of sanity, a fragile performance meant to protect a wounded self. When that mask begins to crack, the narcissist faces something they fear more than losing you. They face themselves. At first, they won't admit it. They'll tell themselves you were replaceable, that someone new will give them the same admiration. They'll even post pictures, play games, and pretend they're happier than ever. But behind the performance, something begins to unravel. The silence becomes deafening. The validation they used to draw from you, the small messages, the compassion, the understanding, is gone. What replaces it is not peace, it's a void. Philosophers like Nietzsche described this void as the abyss that looks back. It's the moment where the narcissist, stripped of admiration, must confront the emptiness inside. You were not just a person in their story. You were the mirror that reflected the part of them they could not see. And when that mirror disappears, their identity collapses. Studies show that individuals with strong narcissistic traits experience a sharp decline in mood and self-esteem after a breakup. Not because they loved, but because they lost their source of control. If you've ever felt like someone only realized your worth after you left, it's not an accident. The human brain is wired to recognize value through loss. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman called it loss aversion. The tendency to feel the pain of loss more intensely than the joy of gain. When the narcissist loses you, they're not suddenly becoming enlightened. They're finally forced to see what they were blind to all along, and that blindness hurts. Eckhart Tolle once explained that most people live in unconscious relationships where they confuse emotional dependency with love. The narcissist's realization is precisely the moment consciousness enters the picture. They begin to notice the absence of your calm presence, your listening, your patience, things they once took for granted. It's like being deprived of oxygen. The very thing they never noticed becomes the thing they now crave. You might wonder why it took your absence for them to see your worth. The truth is, narcissists don't see people as people. They see them as functions. You were a function of validation, a role that fed their ego. And when you stepped out of that role, their internal system broke down. Socrates once said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." But narcissists live precisely the unexamined life. They never look within until the pain forces them to. That's why their realization feels more like a collapse than an awakening. It's a strange paradox. When you were giving your best, they couldn't see it. But the moment you withdraw, they start replaying memories, searching through conversations, even stalking your progress. It's not love they're feeling, it's disorientation. The illusion that they were superior has been challenged. You, the person they underestimated, became the one thing they can't control. And nothing terrifies the narcissist more than losing control. There's a study from the University of Georgia that found narcissists experience a sharp drop in self-regard when they face rejection from someone they viewed as inferior. It destabilizes their core belief of superiority. The more authentic and self-aware you were, the harder the fall for them. They begin to remember the small details they once ignored, your laughter, your consistency, your empathy, not because they suddenly appreciate them, but because those qualities expose what they lack. In that moment of realization, something deeper happens. The narcissist's story about themselves starts to crumble. They can't rewrite you as the villain anymore because your absence disproves their narrative. You didn't beg. You didn't chase. You disappeared quietly, and that silence speaks louder than any confrontation. Psychologists call this the mirror collapse, a phase where the narcissist's self-image fractures under the weight of reality. And while they're trapped in confusion, you begin to see the truth they never could. Their power was never real. It was borrowed. From your compassion, your patience, your belief in them. The illusion they lived in was one you helped build out of love, and the moment you stopped feeding it, the structure fell apart. What's fascinating is that this moment, their so-called realization, is also your turning point. You stop wondering if they'll ever understand what they lost and start understanding what you gained. Clarity. You were never hard to love. They were incapable of loving without control. Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating what was once unconscious. And while they sink into confusion, you rise into awareness. The narcissist's awakening is not a moment of enlightenment, it's the collapse of illusion. But for you, it's the beginning of liberation. It's where illusion meets truth, where manipulation meets self-worth, and where you finally understand that losing you was not their punishment, it was your freedom. Sigmund Freud once said, "The ego is not master in its own house." Few sentences describe the narcissistic mind more accurately. Behind the facade of superiority lies a deep and silent dependence, not on love, but on reflection. To the narcissist, you were never just a partner, a friend, or a colleague. You were a mirror, a surface through which they could see a version of themselves that looked whole. Without that mirror, they cease to exist in the way they know themselves. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the disowned self, buried deep beneath the persona. For the narcissist, that shadow is unbearable. It's filled with shame, rejection, and a constant fear of being exposed as ordinary. They survive by projecting that shadow onto others. You became the container of everything they didn't want to see in themselves: vulnerability, empathy, imperfection. They fed off your reactions because your attention confirmed that they mattered. But the paradox is this: the more you gave, the less they saw you. In therapy, narcissistic patients often describe relationships as a kind of stage performance. One patient once told psychoanalyst Heinz Kohut, "I don't feel real until someone else reacts to me." That's the essence of the mirror effect. Their identity depends on how others reflect them back. It's not genuine self-worth, it's borrowed self-perception. Every compliment, every emotional response becomes proof of existence. And when that reflection disappears, so does the illusion of power. You might have noticed how they would provoke you. Start an argument out of nowhere, make a hurtful remark, then study your reaction. That wasn't random, it was a psychological feeding ritual. Negative attention still confirmed their control. Freud referred to this as narcissistic supply, and modern psychology still uses the term today. It's the invisible currency of a narcissist's survival, attention at any cost. When you reacted, you paid them. When you ignored them, you broke the system. But why do they need this constant reflection? Research from the Journal of Personality Disorders suggests that individuals with high narcissistic traits experience unstable self-esteem that fluctuates daily based on external validation. Their confidence isn't internal, it's situational. It's why they can seem invincible one moment and desperate the next. They depend on others to maintain the illusion of strength. You unknowingly became their emotional anchor, not because of your weakness, but because of your depth. The philosopher Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." For the narcissist, it becomes, "I'm seen, therefore I am." Their sense of self collapses without external recognition. And this is why they were drawn to you. They saw in you something stable, a genuine emotional presence, self-awareness, authenticity. You were everything they weren't. They mistook your compassion for dependence and your empathy for naivety, but in truth, it was your stability that kept their chaos hidden. In psychological terms, you became their self-object, someone whose emotional responses maintain their inner equilibrium. That's why they often imitate your traits. You might have noticed they started using your expressions, your values, even your hobbies. It wasn't admiration, it was absorption. They mirrored you to keep their identity from dissolving. Jung described this as psychic vampirism, the unconscious draining of another's life energy to sustain one's own illusion. And then something shifts. The more you grow aware, the more their reflection weakens. You begin to detach, to question, to see patterns. The mirror starts cracking. Suddenly, their charm feels empty, their confidence rehearsed, their love conditional. They sense the change before you even speak it. A narcissist is hypersensitive to the slightest withdrawal of attention. It threatens their survival. They might accuse you of being distant or cold, but what they're really saying is, I can no longer see myself through you. When that happens, they panic. They'll do anything to restore the reflection, grand gestures, apologies, even fake vulnerability. But it's not you they miss. It's the feeling of power they had when your emotions revolved around them. Psychologists call this the mirror panic. It's the moment the narcissist realizes their reflection no longer responds, and with it, their identity begins to fade. What's remarkable, and often misunderstood, is that this entire cycle is not about dominance but dependence. Narcissists depend on others more than anyone else, yet their pride won't let them admit it. It's emotional slavery disguised as superiority. Nietzsche warned of this in his concept of resentment, the inner bitterness of those who can only define themselves through opposition. The narcissist needs someone to look down on to feel above. Without that contrast, they feel invisible. But here's what they never expect. When you stop reflecting their illusion, you stop existing in their fantasy, and you start existing in your truth. You stop reacting, start observing, and suddenly the entire power dynamic collapses. They lose the one thing they can't manipulate, your awareness. Eckhart Tolle calls this shift presence. It's the moment you no longer get pulled into their emotional storm, and that's where their power ends. Because the mirror they once used to control you becomes the mirror that reveals them to themselves. The very energy they exploited becomes the light that exposes their shadow. When the narcissist needed you to feel powerful, they never realized they were feeding off something they couldn't own, your authenticity. And once you take that back, their illusion fades. What's left is silence. Not your silence this time, but theirs. The silence of someone staring into a mirror that no longer answers back. Silence has a sound. It's not the absence of noise, it's the presence of everything they can no longer control. When you finally walk away from a narcissist, truly walk away, what follows isn't peace for them, it's disintegration. Because the one thing their ego cannot survive without is response. Your words, your emotions, your attention, those were their oxygen. And when you stop supplying it, they suffocate. Psychologists call this the narcissistic collapse. It happens when the supply, the validation, admiration, or emotional reaction suddenly disappears. Dr. Ramani Durvasula, one of the leading experts on narcissistic behavior, explains that when this happens, the narcissist experiences a kind of identity crisis. Their internal narrative begins to break down, and in its place grows a gnawing sense of worthlessness. But here's the paradox: they will never show it. They'll wear a mask of indifference, pretend to be unaffected, and yet behind the scenes they're haunted by a void they can't escape. You see, silence doesn't just remove your presence, it confronts them with theirs. For the first time, they have no one to project onto, no one to blame, no one to fix or to feed from. Carl Jung described this moment as the encounter with the shadow. It's when a person, stripped of distractions, faces the truth of who they are. But narcissists fear that truth more than anything, because it's built on emptiness. They've spent their lives escaping it through manipulation, seduction, domination. And now, Your silence has trapped them in it. Many survivors of narcissistic relationships underestimate the power of their withdrawal. They think silence is passive, when in reality it's one of the most active, transformative actions you can take. Studies on emotional regulation show that detachment is a form of psychological boundary setting. It rewires your brain to respond differently to emotional triggers. What used to feel like loss now becomes clarity. What used to feel like weakness becomes strength. The same silence that destroys their illusion rebuilds your power. In his lectures on relationships, Eckhart Tolle often says, "When you react, you become their energy source. When you observe, you become free." That's exactly what happens here. Every time you resist the urge to explain, justify, or defend, you reclaim a part of yourself they once owned. You stop being the mirror and become the observer. You stop being their reflection and become your own presence. And for the narcissist, that shift is catastrophic. Freud would have called this the withdrawal of libido, the redirection of psychic energy back toward the self. In simpler terms, you stop investing your emotional energy in them and start investing it in you. That's why they spiral. They'll often try to provoke you back into contact. A message, a sudden call, a story designed to reach you indirectly. It's not affection, it's strategy. They're testing the silence, trying to find cracks in it. Because your indifference terrifies them more than your anger ever did. Anger meant you still cared. Silence means you're gone. This is the moment the narcissist begins to feel what psychologists call narcissistic injury, the deep psychological wound that threatens their self-image. They don't experience sadness like most people. They experience shame, rage, and panic. They might start rewriting the story, telling others you were unstable, cold, or ungrateful. But this rewriting is not just manipulation, it's self-preservation. It's how they protect themselves from the unbearable truth. They lost control. Nietzsche once wrote, "The most dangerous man is the one who has nothing left to lose." But in your silence, you become exactly that, untouchable. Because when you no longer seek validation, you can't be controlled. The narcissist, who once believed your worth depended on their attention, begins to realize the opposite. Their sense of worth depended entirely on yours. And this is where the real punishment lies, not in vengeance but in absence. You're no longer part of their narrative. You're not proving, explaining, or defending. You've left the stage, and now they're performing to an empty theater. They'll replay the moments, try to recall what they said that pushed you away, but it's too late. The silence has already rewritten the script. There's a psychological concept called extinction. When a behavior loses its reward, it eventually dies. That's what your silence does. It cuts off the reward loop that kept their manipulation alive. No more reactions, no more attention, no more emotional payoff. At first, they'll escalate, desperate attempts to trigger you back. Then, slowly, they'll fade. Not because they've changed, but because the system has no fuel left. Socrates taught that the beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms. In your silence, you redefine everything. Love, power, worth. You realize love isn't sacrifice, it's reciprocity. Power isn't control, it's composure. Worth isn't proven through pain, it's recognized through peace. And in that recognition, you become what they could never be, self-sufficient. Your absence becomes their mirror. It forces them to confront the very emptiness they projected onto you. It's a silent revelation, one that cuts deeper than any confrontation ever could. They thought they could replace you quickly, that your silence would be temporary. But as time passes, they begin to feel something they don't understand, genuine loss. Not because they love you, but because, for the first time, they have to live without the reflection that made them feel alive. That's the true power of your withdrawal. It doesn't just end the cycle, it exposes it. It doesn't just hurt them, it heals you. And as they spiral in confusion, you step into something they will never reach. Peace that doesn't depend on anyone's reaction. When you finally escape the gravitational pull of a narcissist, the silence that follows can feel unbearable. You stand in the aftermath of what feels like emotional warfare, confused, drained, questioning your reality. But this moment, as raw and uncertain as it feels, is where transformation begins. Carl Jung believed that the greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can only be outgrown. You don't solve the pain they left behind, you transcend it. For many survivors, this period feels like a rebirth and a breakdown at once. The narcissist dismantled your sense of identity piece by piece, not because you were weak, but because they feared your strength. The process of reclaiming yourself begins by understanding that your sensitivity, empathy, and depth were never flaws. They were your greatest sources of power. Modern psychology confirms this. Dr. Judith Orloff, an expert in emotional healing, calls empathy the superpower of human connection. It allows you to feel deeply, to read others, to adapt, but without boundaries. It also makes you a target. The goal now is not to stop feeling, it's to feel with awareness. The first stage of recovery is often confusion. You replay moments, question your reactions, even miss the person who hurt you. That's cognitive dissonance, the clash between what you experienced and what you believed. Freud described this as the repetition compulsion, the mind's attempt to return to familiar pain, in hopes of rewriting the ending. But every time you resist the urge to re-engage, you weaken that old programming. Neuroscience backs this up. Repeated detachment creates new neural pathways, replacing obsession with clarity. You're not just healing emotionally, you're rewiring your brain. Philosophers and psychologists converge on one truth. Awareness is the foundation of freedom. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Nietzsche wrote that one must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. That chaos, the sleepless nights, the overthinking, the tears, it's not your end. It's the friction that forges self-mastery. You begin to understand that what broke you was never love. It was dependency disguised as connection. And by seeing that, you begin to step into a new identity, one rooted in self-respect, not self-sacrifice. As you rebuild, something fascinating happens. You start to notice the small victories. You no longer check your phone for their messages. You stop explaining your boundaries to people who don't deserve them. You start to enjoy your own company, something the narcissist once made you doubt you could do. These are not minor wins. They are signs of reintegration. Jung called this process individuation. The journey of becoming your authentic self by embracing what was once hidden. Every time you choose peace over chaos, you strengthen that authentic identity. Many people describe a strange sense of awakening during this phase. Colors feel more vivid, music feels alive again. You laugh at things you hadn't found funny in years. That's your nervous system coming back online after prolonged emotional stress. According to trauma researchers like Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, the body stores emotional pain as tension, fatigue, even illness. As you process the trauma, your body literally releases it. The weight you feel lifting isn't metaphorical, it's physiological. And yet the narcissist may still linger in your thoughts, not because you want them back, but because your mind is trying to make sense of the story. This is where philosophy offers healing where psychology stops. Stoicism teaches that we can't control others, only our response to them. Epictetus wrote, "We suffer not from events, but from our judgments about them." The narcissist's behavior was never your reflection. It was their projection. Your healing begins when you stop trying to understand their why and start rediscovering your own who. You might realize that the traits they mocked, your kindness, your patience, your idealism, are the same qualities that make you magnetic, creative, and wise. They tried to convince you those qualities were weaknesses because they couldn't possess them. The irony is that what they devalued in you is what you will use to rise. People often think healing means becoming harder. In truth, real healing means becoming softer, but with discernment. Compassion with boundaries. Love without self-abandonment. A fascinating study from Harvard on post-traumatic growth found that 92% of participants who overcame toxic relationships reported higher levels of emotional intelligence and resilience after recovery. Pain forced them to evolve, to recognize patterns, trust intuition, and value authenticity over intensity. That's your path now. You stop chasing validation and start cultivating peace. You no longer confuse attachment with love. You stop rescuing others and start respecting yourself. Eckhart Tolle calls this awakening the pain body's death. The moment you observe your suffering without identifying with it, the ego that was built on pain begins to dissolve. You stop reliving the story and start rewriting it. The narcissist was not your punishment, they were your initiation. Through them, you learned what you will never tolerate again. You learned that peace is not found in others, but within. And here's the transformation they never saw coming. You no longer seek closure from them. You become closure. You embody it through your calm, your distance, your growth. Your life becomes the evidence of your healing. Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." Your why is freedom, not from them, but from the need for anyone to define your worth again. The narcissist may look back someday, realizing too late that you were not just a reflection of their power, you were the source of your own. But by then, you'll be too far ahead, no longer seeking revenge or recognition, only peace. The destruction they caused becomes the soil where your strength grows, and the silence they feared most becomes the sound of your evolution. It always starts the same way. The narcissist reappears when the storm has settled, when you've begun to rebuild, when your silence has turned into strength. They don't come back because they've changed. They come back because something in their world has collapsed again. Carl Jung once wrote that what you resist persists. The narcissist resists self-reflection, so the same emptiness that drove them before keeps pulling them back toward the one place they once felt whole, you. They might send a casual message. "Hey, just wanted to see how you've been." Maybe a memory they know will trigger nostalgia. Sometimes they appear remorseful, confessing mistakes, quoting lessons they've supposedly learned. But look closer. Real regret involves empathy, awareness, accountability. What they feel is not remorse, it's absence. It's not, "I miss you." It's, "I miss how you made me feel about myself." Freud described this dynamic as repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to re-enter old patterns, not to heal them, but to reassert control. Studies on personality disorders show that narcissists often experience what's called nostalgic looping. When their new source of attention begins to fade, they mentally rewind to past relationships that gave them stability. It's not sentimental, it's strategic. The narcissist doesn't remember the damage, they remember the effect, the way your empathy calmed their chaos. But what they don't anticipate is that you're no longer the same person. When you've gone through narcissistic abuse and survived, something in you transforms. You develop what psychologists call post-narcissistic growth, the ability to see manipulation patterns before they even unfold. Their words sound familiar now, but empty. You recognize the rhythm of their apologies, the structure of their guilt, the rehearsed vulnerability, and that's when you finally see the truth. They're not trying to rebuild love. They're trying to rebuild control. There's an old saying in therapy, "The narcissist doesn't miss you, they miss your reaction." When you responded, they felt powerful. When you detached, you became unpredictable, and unpredictability terrifies them. They want the version of you that over-explained, that doubted yourself, that tried to prove your worth. But that version no longer exists. You've outgrown the illusion. Eckhart Tolle once said, "Until you stop identifying with the pain, you remain a prisoner of it." The narcissist is still trapped there, cycling through temporary highs and inevitable collapses. They think reaching out to you will restore the old dynamic, but they don't realize you've stepped out of their emotional time zone. You now exist in the present, while they're stuck replaying a past they distorted. What's fascinating is how predictable their return often is. A study in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships found that narcissistic individuals are significantly more likely to attempt reconciliation after sensing that their former partner has moved on emotionally or socially. It's not love, it's ego panic. They can't tolerate the idea that you're thriving without them. Your success, your peace, your silence, all of it contradicts the image they built of you as dependent and fragile. That contradiction ignites their insecurity. You become living proof that their narrative was false. So they'll test the waters, a memory, a compliment, even fake humility. Some might talk about therapy, spirituality, or self-growth. But beware of what psychologists call pseudo-transformation. It's the performance of change without the substance. True transformation requires accountability and sustained self-awareness. A narcissist's transformation ends the moment the audience stops clapping. What drives them back isn't your beauty, your kindness, or your memories together. It's the reflection of themselves they once saw through you, the mirror they lost. When that reflection is gone, they feel invisible. Nietzsche wrote, "Man is something that must be overcome." The narcissist never overcomes themselves. They orbit around the same patterns, feeding on new mirrors, new admirers, new illusions. You, however, have broken that orbit. If you engage, even briefly, they'll sense the door opening. They'll step through it with practiced charm, promising change, weaving stories of loneliness and awakening. But watch what happens when you hold your boundary, when you stay calm, detached, grounded. The mask slips. They may grow irritated, accuse you of arrogance, or play the victim. That's the moment the illusion collapses again. Your composure reflects their instability, and they can't bear the comparison. Carl Jung believed that healing requires integrating the shadow, facing the darkness within. The narcissist refuses this integration. Instead, they project it outward, searching for someone to carry it for them. When they come back, they're not looking for love, they're looking for a carrier. And when you refuse to carry it, you're not being cruel, you're setting both of you free. There's a statistic that says it takes an average of 7 attempts for a person to permanently leave a toxic relationship. But those who finally do often describe an awakening, not of anger, but of clarity. You no longer crave closure, validation, or revenge. You crave peace. You start realizing that not every story deserves an ending. Some simply require an exit. Socrates once said, "The secret of change is to focus all your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new." When the narcissist tries to come back, your greatest strength is indifference. Not hatred, not vengeance, indifference. Because nothing destroys their illusion faster than being met with calm certainty. You've seen the performance, you know the script, and now you're no longer part of the play. Their regret, in truth, is not about you. It's about the mirror that no longer works. They realize, perhaps for the first time, that you were the only real thing in their world of make-believe. But that realization comes too late, because by the time they see your worth, you've already remembered your own. That's the psychology of their regret. Not the awakening of conscience, but the confrontation with emptiness. And your refusal to return becomes not revenge, but revelation. That real power was never in their control over you, but in your decision to stop giving them any. There's a moment, quiet and almost unnoticeable, when healing turns into freedom. It's not when you stop thinking about the narcissist or when the memories stop hurting. It's when you realize their story no longer defines you. You're no longer trying to win, prove, or justify. You've transcended the game entirely. That's the real victory. Peace that no one can take away, because it no longer depends on anyone else's behavior. Eckhart Tolle said, "True power is living the realization that you are enough." That's where your journey has brought you, a place beyond the constant highs and lows, beyond needing to be seen or understood. The narcissist's world runs on chaos, but yours now runs on stillness. You've stopped reacting to their storms because you've become the calm. This is not numbness, it's mastery. It's the deep understanding that peace is not found in control, but in surrender. Not in dominance, but in detachment. In psychology, detachment is often misunderstood. It doesn't mean indifference or avoidance. It means emotional clarity, the ability to see things as they are without distortion. Freud once noted that maturity begins when one learns to postpone reaction in favor of understanding. Detachment is that pause, the sacred space between what happens and how you respond. It's the same space that Stoic philosophers like Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus spoke of when they taught that the obstacle is the way. Every manipulation, every betrayal, every loss has been your training ground for inner strength. The narcissist can't understand this kind of peace. Their entire existence depends on external validation. Without conflict, they wither. Without attention, they fade. That's why your calm disturbs them more than your anger ever did. Because anger still connects you to them. Calm disconnects you completely. It's the sound of the strings snapping one by one. They'll try to provoke, to test your detachment, but all they'll find is silence. Not the silence of repression, but the silence of self-possession. Carl Jung wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." That's the essence of this phase. You stop being a product of their chaos and start becoming the architect of your peace. You start choosing your thoughts the way an artist chooses colors. You wake up not wondering what they're thinking or doing, but what you can create today, who you can become, how you can expand. This shift from obsession to creation is where freedom truly begins. And yet the most profound change is internal. You start forgiving, not them, but yourself, for staying too long, for ignoring the red flags, for believing love could heal what trauma created. This self-forgiveness is liberation in its purest form. It dissolves the shame that once tethered you to the past. You realize that empathy isn't a curse. It's your greatest strength when paired with wisdom. You no longer see yourself as a victim of manipulation, but as a student of human behavior. What once broke you now educates you. Nietzsche once said that those who have a why to live can bear almost any how. Your why has evolved. It's no longer about proving your worth, it's about protecting your peace. You've learned that the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. Hate still feeds the connection. Indifference starves it. And through that starvation, something sacred is born. Self-respect. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't explain, doesn't chase. It simply is. There's something almost poetic about how the cycle ends. The narcissist, once addicted to your attention, will look back and see a reflection they can't touch anymore. You've become what philosophers call self-contained. Descartes described the soul as a thinking thing, independent of all else. That's what you are now, independent in thought, emotion, and spirit. You no longer need closure because you are the closure. You no longer seek justice because peace has replaced the need for revenge. Psychologists have observed that survivors who reach this stage often display higher emotional intelligence than before the relationship. You can read people's motives without absorbing their emotions. You see manipulation for what it is, a cry for power from the powerless. You understand projection, gaslighting, and control not as mysteries, but as symptoms of insecurity. And with that understanding comes compassion, not the naive kind that opens the door again, but the enlightened kind that walks away without hate. Socrates said, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." In your detachment, you understand this deeply. You no longer need all the answers. You're at peace with the unknown. You've stopped analyzing why they did what they did, because the answer no longer matters. The mind that once searched for meaning in their chaos is now quiet, focused, present. You've transcended the drama, and that's the moment the narcissist truly loses. Not when you block them, not when you move on with someone else, but when you no longer think in reaction to them. You've become free in the only place that ever mattered, your mind. Your peace becomes their silence. Your detachment becomes their lesson. They realize too late that they never destroyed you. They revealed you. In the end, the real victory isn't about seeing them regret, apologize, or suffer. It's about walking through the ruins of what they tried to break and realizing you're still standing, stronger, wiser, softer. You don't need closure from them because you've already written the ending. The last line reads simply, "I found peace." And in that peace lies everything they'll spend a lifetime searching for: authenticity, self-love, and freedom. The story ends not with revenge, but with serenity, because peace, once found, is the loudest victory of all.